This is Studio 809.
Everybody, welcome to the Outdoors Hiking Bob podcast. I am your host, Hiking Bob Falcone, and you can find out everything you want to know about me at my website, hikingbob.com, which has links to my social media accounts, my columns at the Colorado Springs Independent, my other podcast, my photography website, and also you can sign up for my newsletter, which comes out about once a week and highlights all the stuff that's happened during the previous week and anything new that's come up since then, including any updates. And also you can send me an email from there if you have a suggestion or comment or anything like that. You can do that all from my website at hikingbob.com. Today with me is a couple of special guests from the Trails and Open Space Coalition, Executive Director Susan Davies and Mike Rigney, who is their GIS coordinator. It's also known as in my world of reading maps and stuff as the map guru. If you've heard Mike on here before when he's talked about the Ring to Peak Trail system and the progress on that, which is probably something we need to sit down and talk about sometime this winter and see how things have progressed during the year. But we have thank both of you for being here today. And today we're going to talk about a thing called a story map, which is something new to me. So if one of you wants to tell us what a story map is, and we'll talk about what this one is all about.
Well, let me start. Bob, thanks for giving us this opportunity. It's great to see you again and hear from you. And yeah, this is a really exciting project, and we couldn't have done it without Mike, who does so much around here and wears many hats. But Mike can kind of explain a little bit what a story map is and why he came up this idea for this particular project, which is how best to celebrate the 25 years of TOPS. Take it away.
Well, thanks, Susan. Bob, great to be with you again. Very simply, a story map is a map with a story built around it. So one of the things we looked at doing was highlighting a number of properties that TOPS has purchased over its many years and look at the different types of acquisitions that Parks has done with those properties, and put that in a story that had the individual properties on a map that people could play with, look around on, something that they could zoom in on, and then ask questions of the individual pieces of the map. So a story map, it combines an online map that is immersive, that you can play with, and then stories to tell an immersive story about those individual properties. And so we gathered information, we gathered photos, we gathered the idea for having people who were intimately involved in those properties tell us the story about how they did what they did, and in very short snippets of video. You can also do audio, but video really brought their stories to life about how they were involved in those various projects. So a story map combines a great story with a map, and everybody loves maps and everybody loves stories. So that's how we decided to do something. Originally, we picked a number of different TOPS properties to highlight and to profile, but we really narrowed it down to three that had some differences in how they were acquired and why they were acquired. And Susan, you want to talk a little bit about the decision process that we made?
Before you do that, let me just ask you a really quick question. You narrowed this down to three properties, and we'll talk about in a second what those three are. Are all the properties mentioned at some point during the story map?
Well, the map itself includes all of the properties that TOPS has acquired. Okay. And so it talks a bit about why TOPS was enacted and what it's done, but then the map includes all the properties that TOPS has acquired. And so they're colored slightly differently than the background parcels on the map, which are all Parks properties, but the the TOPS, the ones that were primarily acquired through funding through TOPS or completely acquired, show up as a different color, and you can click on those properties and get the name of it. So you can zoom around on the map, look for the properties that were acquired by TOPS, and then click on them. And you can also add other information. You can add pictures of the properties, but we kept it simple and just had the properties. So all of the TOPS properties are there, and you can pick any one and find out the name of it.
Okay. And let me ask you one more question. This sounds to me a lot like the display at the Pioneers Museum, the Story of Us display on the big board. Is it kind of the same thing where you can zoom in and select something and learn more about what's highlighted on the map? Are we talking about kind of a similar thing to that?
It's very similar. I think the one at the Pioneer Museum obviously went into much more detail than we were able to do. We wanted to keep it simple,
Sure.
Keep it focused on those 3 properties, but it's very much the same thing. You can do all kinds of things now with technology that you couldn't do before, and that's a good example of how technology is being used to really tell compelling stories using maps.
Okay.
So it's basically the same thing.
And I know how much theirs costs, so I'm sure that there's a big cost difference too. That was a small fortune, well spent, I should say. I'm not picking on them. The money they spent on that was just wonderful. I mean, it's really great. But I can see where you can't go into quite that much detail without spending a whole boatload of money to make that happen. Susan, which 3 sites did you guys pick, and how did you come to those 3 sites?
Well, we had a really good staff meeting about it, and I think the goals of this project was to be very inclusive. We know that there are a lot of people that live here today that weren't here 25 years ago when TOPS was passed with a citizen initiative. So to connect people to TOPS, it was important to us to pick 3 properties that were spread out a little bit and had unique stories. So we chose one of the first properties to be acquired and probably one of the most famous, Red Rock Open Space. Mm-hmm. And we asked Richard Scorman to remember back to that time and why it was so critical for the city to save that property. And we have to tell the story rather quickly, simply, but that's a complex story. I mean, that involved water rights, that involved developers, that was a really not an easy thing to acquire, and yet the city was able to do it. So that was Red Rock. Cheyenne Mountain State Park, another complex story, which when you read it, you'll kind of get a feel for what it was involved. But Chris Lieber, who was the head of TOPS at the Times, talks about all the people that participated in that process to get it done. But there were just a few champions, and Chris was one of them, that made sure that the right people were having the right conversations and actually saw the potential in that park. And then finally, Ute Valley Park, which was a city property, but then was expanded because thanks to TOPS, as well as Great Outdoors Colorado. But it was citizens that lived in that area that were using that Hewlett-Packard property informally. Couldn't imagine that dozens of homes would be built in their favorite playground. Came together, raised money, had bake sales, did all kinds of things to force the issue. And thanks to TOPS, we were able to buy that property and almost double the size of Ute Valley Park.
I'm one of those people who used that section of the park informally because there was no, to be fair, there was no signs that said do not enter. There were no fences or anything like that, and people just naturally transverse from one section to another. So when it was bought to become part of the park, it was like, well, this is pretty cool. That now we have this whole swath of land from this point to that point, from the highway basically over to another highway almost, to enjoy that park. And it's and that new section, I shouldn't say new, that east end is dramatically different from the entire rest of the park, the west end of the park. It's a totally different landscape and a different atmosphere there.
Totally. And Christine Thomas is who we interviewed for that. And she is an extraordinary person. I think she was called out as Volunteer of the Year last year in the Parks Department. But she has been part of the Friends group from the very beginning and one of the drivers behind that effort to make sure that that land was saved, and her enthusiasm. And she will tell you, that's my park. I'm out there several times a week and keeping an eye on things. And so the kind of ownership you have from these people that feel this is their legacy. And we have many stories like that I'm glad Mike has helped telling.
And she's the president of the Friends of Ute Valley Park.
She is the vice president.
Vice president, okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I knew she was up there in some form or another. I get plenty of emails from them about the work days they have, and I wish I could find time in my schedule to go out there and help them out because I enjoy that park quite a bit. It's really one of the nice gems and not far from me, so it's a short drive for me to get to it. So tell us about... And we'll start off, I guess, take a step back, that for those who aren't aware or not listening to this from locally, that the TOPS is a Trails and Open Space and Parks tax, 0.01%. So it's a penny on every $10 that goes towards a fund that is primarily used to acquire open space from people who are willing to sell it to the city. And then there's some money put aside for stewardship and maintenance and things like that. And somebody can go to other parks. But primarily the purpose is, and has been since the beginning, to acquire open space. And I've remarked to people that if I could see that in my 31 years of living here, that if we didn't have this tax and this ability to purchase these open spaces, this city, as it expanded rapidly, would end up being like a concrete jungle from one end to the other, from the east to west. Would have just been, there were a lot of open spaces in between that helped preserve the nature of the city, would probably have ended up being developed. And it's not an anti-development program. It's not here to stop development, but if there's a chance that we could build a park instead of a development and a developer is willing to sell it to us, then we likely would try to buy it and make it into an open space instead of a place that's got buildings or pavement or roads or what have you, parking lots on or something like that. So that's in a very small nutshell and an overly simplified one without spending a lot of time talking about. That's pretty much what the TOPS program is. So we're talking about 25 years of this program and what it's done since then. Give us an idea on where we would be if we didn't have, I mean, I've kind of summarized it, but can you go into more specific, like where we would be if we didn't have this program and some of the parks that you've highlighted on here? For example, Susan talked a little bit about Red Rock Canyon. Either one of you can answer this. What was actually going to go in Red Rock Canyon if the city didn't find a way to acquire that land?
Well, I think one of the most dramatic things that we feature in the story map is a diorama that was built by the original owner, or the owner that Parks acquired the property from. And it features a World Trade Center, for instance, massive housing developments, retail centers. And with that image in the background, you see what would have happened to Red Rock Canyon if that development had gone in. And thankfully, the Pioneer Museum has preserved that diorama so that people can see what might have happened if the city hadn't been able to acquire Red Rocks. And listening to Richard Scorman tell the story of how close the city came to losing that property, and what an absolute tragedy that would have been if it would have been developed in that way. So that's one of the things you can do with this type of representation of features on a map, is you can juxtapose that rather bland image of a square on a piece of property with what it might have been and what it is now for the people of Colorado Springs.
Is my recollection correct that one of the things they had planned for that was also a huge 18-hole golf course in there?
At least one.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
people, I think, would have a hard time imagining what that would look like on when you visit Red Rock Canyon open space right now. But if it wasn't for TOPS, that might have been.
And I'll be fair, an 18-hole golf course would be the lesser of all evils that could have happened there. It would certainly be preferable to, rows and rows of buildings and houses and things like that. But obviously, it would not be as favorable as what we now have over there, which is just big, wide open space and trails and talk about different archaeological or I don't say archaeological, but different geological features. I mean, there's so many different things in that park and the history. If you don't know it, like, did you know that part over there used to be a trailer park, and this part here was a quarry, and this part used to be a trash dump, and this was a ranch over here, and there's so many different features to it. All that history would have been lost without that purchase, and you've, it sounds like, have helped preserve some of that. Do you go back into like historical pictures in this thing? So do you have pictures of what it looked like before the city acquired it and what was used for beforehand?
Well, we have one picture in particular that shows the old quarry operation and what that looked like. But again, to keep it simple so that people maintain their interest, you try to highlight the things that you're trying to tell the story around, in addition to the location on a map. So
sure, we had
to keep it simple and keep it provocative so that people would keep an interest and remember the story.
I would like to think that you've got this sweet spot here where you got just enough in there for people to look at and go, wow, that's cool. And then just a little bit more for people to say, I need to go out there and take a look at this myself and see what this used to be. And then maybe when they think about what could have been, they can start pointing out the different features that are out there. I'd like to think that that's exactly the sweet spot that you've hit with this, and I'm sure you have. You're great at what you do there. What did you feature about Ute Valley Park? What did you feature in that part of the map?
Well, we featured one of the images that I think is most striking is the proximity of housing developments. And when you're up on top of Ute Valley Park, you can see development all around you. But when you're down below, when you're in the valley, when you're surrounded by ancient pine trees and things like that, you would not imagine that you were in the middle of a city. And so the juxtaposition of development and the park itself as a retreat where people can go and refresh themselves from a day in the urban area, I think is what we tried to feature there.
Cool. Susan, tell us more about the Cheyenne Mountain State Park part of it. People are saying, well, what's this? Is it a state park or is it a city park? What's TOPS doing there? So tell us about how this program has helped benefit our closest state park, which is right on the edge of the city limits here.
Without TOPS, it wouldn't have been saved. The state really had no appetite, nor did they have the resources to preserve it and build that park. It really took TOPS to buy the property, and then to turn it over where they continue to manage it to this day. And I love the fact that the ordinance allowed for that kind of flexibility. You know, it isn't that TOPS has to own everything. TOPS is allowed to buy trail easements. TOPS has a lot of flexibility to buy county property that can be turned over to the state, like this was. So this was unique. At the time, there was a desire to have a state park in this area, but I think there were other opportunities vying for that attention. And it really was this small group of folks that said, this is it. And they were going to lose it. The person that owned the property was ready to sell it for development, some trophy homes up there that would have, just continued the whole Broadmoor area on to the south. And fortunately, they brought the right people to walk the property. And I think they had some really startling things happen, like animals that walked out right in front as they were visiting it, like cue the bear, cue the antelope, whatever they had. Right. But they really had a wonderful experience that led to the eventual purchase. But again, when you think about it, If that one penny on $10 had not been passed in 98, or was it 97? I think it was 90. No, let's see. It's 97. It's 25 years, right? So if it had not been passed in 97, then it would have all been for naught. Because first of all, to get Great Outdoors Colorado money, you have to have match. And TOPS throughout the years has provided that cash match required to bring in the lottery money to bring and to purchase some of these amazing public spaces.
Yeah, and through the years, the TOPS program has purchased additional land that's added on to the state park. I've heard that, one of the things that, like you mentioned, was that they were going to get developers for it. But I think the other part of that issue there, and I don't want to get too much into the history of it, because I want people to look at the story map and get more of it. But there's also no water on that land, and I think that was kind of putting the owners of it in a bind, because you could bring in development, but where are they going to get water? Where are they going to get utilities? Because there's not a drop of water on that, and that is thanks to building the Cheyenne Mountain Complex in NORAD in Cheyenne Mountain there, which, as legend tells it, disrupted the water supply to the ranch that is now Cheyenne Mountain State Park, and completely, allegedly, led to the demise of the ranch. And so it had to go someplace, is what I'm getting at. It had to go someplace. There was a lot of things that happened. I mean, not everybody wakes up every morning and says, well, I just want to sell my land to the city and be out of there. There's a reason why a lot of that happens. But good for us, good for the community, good for the state. They got a great state park out of it. And, good for, I think it's kind of a win-win for the TOPS program. They got to acquire a lot of land and preserve it, but they don't have to manage it. They sign an agreement with the state park, and CPW takes care of it from there. And then, here we go. We bought the land. Have fun. It's all yours. And CPW does a great job managing it. There's archery ranges on there and lots of trails and all that other kind of. And matter of fact, TOPS helped get easements for the Dixon Trail that goes to the top of Cheyenne Mountain. So that was another thing. There was a little sliver of land in there that a private landowner didn't want access to, and we're able to make that happen.
Well, and think about it. We don't have a lot of camping in this region. But that provides so much opportunity for tourists, for visitors. I've camped out there one night this summer. Friends came into town and we went out. We had a blast. And now they have cabins out there. So it truly added an asset for all the people in this region. Just one more great thing for us to do. And
it's a hugely popular campground. And they're actually adding some sites to it during the winter, so it's actually going to get bigger, and it will fill up just as fast. You just have a slightly more chance of getting in there. We can't tell the story of TOPS without talking about where the future of this is going, where the future of TOPS is. As we know, it's due to run out in a couple more years. There was an election to renew it, didn't pass. We can get into an all-night debate as to why it didn't pass. I have my own theories, which I've expressed on here on earlier podcasts. But we're going to try again. Obviously, I don't think anybody really wants to see this fail. They don't want to see this go away. Everybody can, I think, look at the success of it and acknowledge that it's been a good asset for the city and the community in general. I mean, not just city residents who get to use these parks. Where do you see... and not necessarily in the way of the story map, but where do you see the future of TOPS? Where do you think it's going to go? What's the next generation of TOPS going to do?
Well, I certainly hope it gets passed in April. So the plan at this point would be to take it back to the voters next April, which is going to be a crowded ballot because a lot of folks running for city council will have a mayor's race. But it's the appropriate place to put this. It is a city ordinance, city tax. And I think it's an opportunity for people to decide how much TOPS matters to them. The language will start without raising taxes because at this point, the plan is just to seek another extension, maybe 15 years, maybe 20 years. Right. I think that'll be great. And again, back to the story map. The story map is for people to take a look at it and say, oh, this does matter. We have done some amazing things with this program. We've been able to acquire some wonderful properties. And our hope is to even add to the story map a little bit in the next few months. It would be great to look at, maybe Venezia Park. We need to look at all corners of the city to really reflect that TOPS has done some amazing projects in all. Blue Stem Prairie, that was Chris Lieber's suggestion recently, that we should look at Blue Stem. And of course, out east, we need to definitely look at Corral Bluffs too, which a lot of people know very little about that and don't know how incredibly special it is. Again, TOPS purchased it. Without TOPS to purchase it, it might be a motorcycle park, and that incredible loss of history and paleontological value and all of that. So the goal of the Story Map project is to get people excited about what TOPS has done and begin to think about what it should or could do in the future. We are going to be the fastest growing county in the state. There are more and more people coming all the time. I don't know how you feel about that, but it is what it is.
It is what
so
it is.
We are going to need enough places for people to experience what we all experience in Red Rock Open Space or Cheyenne Mountain State Park or in Ute Valley Park, where you can, minutes from downtown, get away from everything and feel you're truly in the Rockies.
Right. And a lot of these places like Ute Valley Park and Cheyenne Mountain State Park and Red Rock, which, three of them that you've highlighted on here, they back up to the National Forest land. So they're a gateway to more and more opportunities that maybe it could have been that getting to that National Forest land would have been more difficult without the purchase of these properties. Ute Valley Park, kind of by extension, you have to kind of go a little bit to get there, but it's close to the National Forest. You can see how, you can look directly off the west end of Ute Valley Park, and a couple blocks away, you're in the National Forest. So it's pretty close by there. So all of these little gateways, and I think that's just as important to people as their own park in the city, is that you can move out from there and keep going and keep going and keep going. One of the beautiful things about living here is you're not, I think one of the nicest things that's happened to Colorado Springs, and completely by accident, was it was built to be backed up against a mountain and against thousands of square miles of national forest land. And the city was founded before the U.S. Forest Service even existed, but who knew that was going to happen? And so we're not going to be completely surrounded by development, that we're always going to have that open space out there and the recreational opportunities that are out there.
The mayor loves to say he wants to create a city that reflects our scenery.
Right.
Well, our focus is the scenery, right?
Right.
We really want people to celebrate and embrace these amazing public assets and be dreaming and create their vision and share what's next.
Right.
What should that next purchase look like, and how do we do that?
Cool. So in light of that, Mike, tell us, as the city acquires more and more property, which is always going to be happening, I think, as long as this thing, it may only be for the next 2 years, but hopefully not. Are you going to expand the story map and maybe go into a little more detail on it and add more properties to it?
Well, I think the idea is for this to be sort of organic, and then we can demonstrate that TOPS has protected areas throughout the area, and there are different stories to tell. So I think we hope that we'll produce more of these story maps and go into more detail. But this was primarily meant to just stimulate people's imagination and also to show that there was a lot of thought and a lot of ingenuity that went in to figuring out how to acquire these properties and why they are so important to the community. And of course, these three were critical, but there are lots of other good stories out there that show that the city is making an effort to acquire properties that are vital to neighborhoods and communities throughout the area. So we plan to do more and go into more detail. This was just to tickle people's interest in what a story map can do.
This will get you going. Now you have to go out there and actually look at the property yourself and see what it's like. I like to think about it. Where can people find the story map?
The story map is located on our website under the TOPS program up at the top. I suppose you could probably put a link directly to it on your.
I'll put it in the show notes.
Yep. And then if people want to learn more about story maps, I've produced a little background information on that, which Bob can host as well. There are lots of good examples of what can be done with story maps, and we're open to ideas from people so that we can use this technology to get more people engaged through telling stories through maps.
Excellent. Well, both of you, thanks so much for being on the podcast. I think this is a great idea. I think this is wonderful and a great way to showcase what it is. I think just enough to get people interested so they go out there on their own, because the whole purpose obviously is go out there and visit these sites and go hiking and cycling and take the kids out and have a family day out there, whatever you want to do, but go out and enjoy these, because that's obviously the purpose of this program, is to entice people to go out there. So I think this is a great way to actually make that happen. So thank you, Mike, for your effort doing it. Like I said, you're the map guru here. I'm the one who, after a couple minutes looking at the map, realized I have it upside down, and maybe that's why nothing's matching up, and maybe I should turn this the other way. Oh, there it is. Now I get it. But you're the map guru here and with TOSC, so I really appreciate that. Susan, thank you so much for giving him the tools and the support to make this happen.
I just say thank you, Mike.
Probably a good way to start. And thank both of you for being on here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Bob. It was great.
All righty.
Thanks, Bob. Appreciate it.
Anytime. And with that, we'll say thanks for listening to the Outdoors Hiking Bob podcast.
Before you go, did you know you can rate and review our Studio 809 podcasts? That will help us, because our egos really need to have thousands and thousands of listeners. But that helps our wonderful sponsors reach more ears too. And we do love our sponsors. So just go to Studio 809 or any individual 809 podcast in your iTunes or podcast app and click on ratings and reviews. Thanks.